Before we begin, please leave a comment, share your thoughts and let us know your lessons learned in the comment section below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Pastor Aaron had never been someone to rush into things. Raised on the quiet hills of a small rural town, his upbringing had been filled with simplicity and faith. His parents, humble farmers, had instilled in him a deep understanding of the importance of patience and hard work. But there was always something missing in Aaron's life. Something he couldn't quite name. He had always known the love of God, but he longed to feel the companionship of a soulmate, a partner who would walk beside him in faith and purpose. Aaron wasn't one to seek fleeting pleasures. He believed in love, but not the kind of love that could easily slip through one's fingers. He wanted something deeper, something divine. His prayers had been constant, unwavering. Lord, show me the one you've chosen for me. Give me a woman to love, not just for a season, but for a lifetime, a woman who will not only be my partner but also my helpmate in carrying out your will. For years, Aaron lived a life of devotion, preaching to his small congregation with passion, hoping that somewhere, somehow, God would bring him the woman he was meant to find. But it seemed that the heavens were silent. The more he prayed, the more the emptiness grew. In the quiet moments of the night, when he knelt before God in his personal prayers, he would ask, Why hasn't she come yet? But the silence continued, until one fateful night when everything changed. It was a Tuesday, the start of a new month. And like every first Tuesday, Aaron made his way to Prayer Mountain, a sacred place where he went to seek divine guidance. He had been going there for years. But that night felt different. The air was thick with anticipation, and the wind howled through the trees as if the very earth was urging him to listen. The mountain was quiet, save for the sound of the storm brewing in the distance. Aaron's heart was heavy, but his faith remained strong. As he knelt on the stone, a deep sense of peace settled over him, and he closed his eyes, asking God for clarity and direction in his life. Hours passed as the storm raged around him. There were no distractions, no phone, no food, just him and his thoughts, intertwined with the words of Scripture. But as midnight approached, something shifted. A soft voice broke the stillness. A voice so sweet it seemed to vibrate through his chest like a drumbeat. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something otherworldly. Aaron opened his eyes in disbelief. But the voice persisted, calling his name, drawing him closer. His heart raced as he turned toward the direction of the voice. But no one was there. He stood, his legs shaky, scanning the fog that seemed to roll in from the mountain's base. And then, like a dream emerging from the mist, a figure appeared. Her name was Grace. She stood there, radiant, as though she had stepped out of another realm. Her white dress shimmered under the dim light of his lantern, glowing like something ethereal. Her hair cascaded down her shoulders in soft waves. And her eyes, those eyes, were a mesmerizing shade of green. Unlike anything he had ever seen before. They were deep, almost unnatural, like the sky before a storm that would soon change everything. I came to pray, she said softly, her voice calm and serene. Aaron's heart pounded in his chest. He knew, deep down, that this was no ordinary woman. This was the answer to his prayers. Though he couldn't yet understand the full weight of it, he didn't know how or why she was there. But in that moment, everything seemed to align. I'm Caleb, he replied, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to remain composed. I know, she whispered, a knowing smile curling on her lips. The Lord speaks to me often about you. The air around them seemed to hum, the storm in the distance forgotten as they stood in the silence of the mountain. Caleb couldn't explain it, but there was something undeniably powerful about her presence. It wasn't just her beauty, or the way her voice seemed to carry a divine weight. It was something deeper, something he couldn't quite grasp. Over the next few days, Caleb found himself drawn to Grace in ways he hadn't expected. She appeared at his church, quietly taking a seat in the back, always present but never intrusive. She never laughed loudly, never imposed herself on others. She simply existed, a calm, quiet force that seemed to shine from within. It was during one of his sermons that Caleb noticed how deeply Grace seemed to connect with the words he spoke. While others in the congregation watched him with varying levels of attentiveness, Grace remained focused, her eyes fixed on him as though she was hearing something more than just his words. She wasn't like the others, she wasn't there for the spectacle. She was there for something far more profound. And Caleb felt it. Days turned into weeks, and their meetings became more frequent. Caleb found himself confiding in Grace, sharing his deepest thoughts and fears. He felt as though she could understand him in ways that no one else could. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt such an intense connection with someone. It was as though his prayers had been answered in a way he had never imagined. One evening, after a long day of prayer and reflection, Caleb felt a surge of courage. He had prayed for years, asking God for a woman to share his life with, someone who would be his partner in both faith and ministry. And now, standing before Grace, he realized that she was the answer he had been waiting for. Without hesitation, he proposed. Grace didn't hesitate either. "If this is the will of God," she said, "then I am ready." Her voice was steady, calm, as though she had known all along what was coming. There were no long speeches, no endless questioning. It was simply a mutual understanding that this was meant to be. Their wedding was a grand affair, a celebration not just of their union but of the divine grace that had brought them together. The town came alive with joy, the air thick with excitement. The church was filled to capacity. People from all corners of the region gathered to witness the joining of two souls destined to walk together in service to God. But as the days passed and they settled into their new life together, Caleb began to sense something was off. Grace was still the woman he had fallen in love with, but there were moments, fleeting, but undeniable, when she seemed distant. At night, she would sit motionless in the dark, her eyes fixed on nothing. She prayed, but not like before. Her prayers were quiet, almost secretive, as though she was hiding something from him. One evening, after a long day of ministry, Caleb noticed a change in Grace's demeanor. Her eyes, which had once shone with a peaceful light, now seemed to flicker with something darker. He brushed it off as fatigue, but the feeling lingered, gnawing at him. And then, one night, as they prepared for bed, something happened. Grace's eyes turned a shade of green so dark it seemed unnatural, like the deep, murky water of a stagnant river. Caleb blinked, confused. He had never seen this side of her before. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice a little too soft, a little too unsure. Grace smiled, but it wasn't the same smile he had come to cherish. It was a smile that felt cold, as though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm just tired, Caleb, very tired." And that's when it hit him. Something was wrong. This wasn't just exhaustion. It wasn't just stress. There was something more, something he couldn't understand, something that was beginning to haunt him. As the days went on, Caleb could no longer ignore the growing unease inside him. There was something in Grace's eyes that didn't belong, something that made his heart race with fear. He had asked God for a woman to share his life with, but he never imagined that the answer would come with a price. Now, as Caleb lay in bed next to his wife, he couldn't shake the feeling that the love he had prayed for was about to lead him into a darkness he couldn't escape. As the days passed, Caleb found himself sinking deeper into confusion. The woman he had once seen as a gift from God, the answer to his prayers, had begun to change. Grace's beauty, once radiant and pure, now seemed to glow with an unsettling intensity. She was always by his side, supporting him in his ministry. But there was a coldness in her presence that he could no longer ignore. It wasn't the warmth he had once felt when she had first appeared before him on the mountain. It was something else entirely. At first, Caleb tried to reassure himself. He told himself that she was simply tired from the demands of their new life together. She had been through so much recently: the wedding, the new responsibilities, the constant attention from the congregation. Surely, he reasoned, the fatigue had begun to weigh on her, just as it had on him. But it wasn't just physical tiredness. It was something more, a deep, unsettling change that Caleb couldn't put into words. Grace would spend hours in prayer, but always alone, retreating to the quiet corners of their home or to the church at night when everyone else had gone. Caleb, once so certain that they were meant to be together, began to feel like a stranger in his own home. There were moments when he would wake in the middle of the night, only to find her standing motionless by the window, staring out into the dark. Her eyes, once filled with compassion and warmth, had become empty and distant, as though she were looking at something far beyond this world. One evening, after a long day of service, Caleb returned home to find Grace sitting in the living room, her back to him. She was whispering softly, her voice almost a chant. He couldn't make out the words, but there was a rhythm to her speech, a cadence that felt both foreign and ancient. He called her name softly. But she didn't respond. It was as though she couldn't hear him. He stepped closer, his heart pounding, unsure of what he was about to find. "Grace?" he asked again, his voice trembling. She turned to him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. There was a flicker in them, something primal. Something Caleb couldn't understand. "I'm praying," she said, her voice distant and almost mechanical. "I'm communing with something greater than you and I." Caleb's heart sank. He had always believed that their bond was a connection made through God's will. But what was this new force? He had heard stories, whispered warnings from the elders in his community about things beyond the human realm, spirits, demons, forces that could possess the weak. Could it be? Was Grace truly the woman he had prayed for? Or had something else entered his life in her place? The next morning, Caleb tried to shake off the unease. He went about his duties, preaching, serving the people, but his mind kept wandering back to Grace. Her behavior was becoming more erratic by the day. She spoke less and less in the company of others, retreating into herself, disappearing into the shadows, and when she did speak, it was as if her words held a different weight, words that seemed to carry a power that Caleb didn't fully understand. During one of his sermons, as he spoke of God's love and mercy, Caleb caught a glimpse of Grace in the back of the church. Her face illuminated by the candlelight. She wasn't looking at him, as she usually did with such focused intensity. Instead, she seemed to be staring at something else. Caleb's heart skipped a beat as he saw her lips move in silent prayer. But this time, it was different. The words she spoke weren't the comforting scriptures they had shared together. Instead, they were words that seemed to vibrate in the air with an unnatural energy. Words Caleb could not understand. He had always believed in the power of prayer, but this was something else, something dark. After the service, Caleb approached Grace, his heart racing with fear. "What were you saying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Those words, they weren't prayers." "Grace, what was that?" Grace looked up at him, her expression cold, unblinking. "I was calling to something," she said softly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "To something that has always been watching over us. Something that has been guiding me for a long time." Caleb recoiled, his heart pounding. "What are you talking about?" His voice was shaking now. "You're scaring me." She smiled then, a slow, knowing smile. "I'm not afraid, Caleb, you should be." Those words hit Caleb like a slap. For the first time, he felt true fear. Fear not for the future, but for the very woman he had chosen to marry. The woman he had believed was sent by God. How had it come to this? Over the next few weeks, Caleb's once perfect life began to unravel. His strength, both spiritual and physical, began to fade. His sermons lost their power, the words feeling hollow in his mouth. The congregation, once so eager to hear him speak, grew distant. Hearts no longer stirred when he preached. Miracles, which had once been a regular occurrence in his ministry, became scarce. Caleb's prayers felt empty, his words bouncing back at him like echoes in a vast, desolate hall. And then, one night, Caleb was jolted awake. He could feel the presence of something watching him. It was as if the air itself had thickened, a weight pressing down on his chest. He reached for Grace, but she was not beside him. Panicked, he scrambled out of bed, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He found her downstairs, standing before the mirror, her eyes closed. She was murmuring words under her breath, words Caleb couldn't make sense of. The air around her seemed to pulse with energy, and the shadows in the room appeared to deepen. "Grace?" Caleb called out, his voice trembling. She opened her eyes slowly, and when she turned to face him, her eyes were no longer the familiar shade of green. They were black, pure black, devoid of any light. Caleb froze, his heart slamming against his ribs. "I found what I was looking for," she said, her voice no longer her own. It was a low, guttural sound, like the growl of an animal. "You called me, Caleb. You asked for me, and now, I'm here." Fear washed over him, his knees shaking as he backed away. He could feel the presence of something dark and ancient behind her. A presence that had taken hold of her completely. "No," Caleb whispered, his throat tight. "This isn't you. Grace, please, tell me this isn't you." Grace's lips curled into a smile that was no longer kind. "You don't know who I am, Caleb, but you will soon enough. You called me, and now you will serve me." In that moment, Caleb realized the terrifying truth. The woman he had married, The woman he had prayed for was no longer the person he had fallen in love with. He had invited something into his life. Something evil. Something beyond his understanding. And now, that darkness was consuming everything. The church, once filled with light and hope, now seemed to be crumbling from within. Caleb's faith, his life's work, was slipping through his fingers. He was lost in a darkness he couldn't escape. And he was beginning to wonder if there was any way back. Could he save Grace? Could he save himself? Or was it too late? The answers, Caleb knew, lay somewhere in the shadows of his own soul. But as the days went on, one thing became certain. The woman he had loved was gone. And in her place was something far more dangerous, far more sinister. And Caleb was no longer sure if he would survive the battle that was to come. Caleb's life had become a nightmare. The woman he had married, Grace, the answer to his prayers, had transformed before his eyes into something unrecognizable. She was no longer the gentle, serene woman who had first appeared on the prayer mountain. The darkness that had quietly settled within her now consumed every aspect of her being. And Caleb felt himself drowning in an abyss he couldn't escape. The once vibrant church, where Caleb had preached with passion, where miracles had flowed freely, was now a hollow place. The walls seemed to echo with silence as if the very air had thickened with a heaviness that no one could shake. Caleb's faith, once unshakable, had begun to crack under the weight of his terrifying reality. Grace, the woman who had once been a beacon of light, had become an agent of something far darker. And Caleb couldn't deny the truth any longer. He was trapped in a web of lies, deception, and spiritual warfare. It started slowly. At first, Caleb tried to convince himself that Grace's strange behavior was just a phase. She had always been a quiet, introspective woman, so her withdrawal into solitude and prayer didn't seem too alarming. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Caleb could no longer ignore the signs. The way she would stare blankly into space for hours, her eyes shifting between unsettling shades of green and black. The low murmurs she spoke in the dead of night, words that seemed to belong to a language not of this world. Caleb had heard whispers of dark powers, things beyond the mortal realm. Spirits that could possess, spirits that could control, and now, in his own home, he was witnessing it firsthand. One night, Caleb couldn't take it anymore. He had to confront Grace. The uncertainty, the fear, the strange sense of dread that had clung to him like a shadow, it was all too much. He could feel himself being pulled into something he didn't understand, something he wasn't prepared for. But he had to face it. He had to know the truth. As the moon cast a faint glow through the window, Caleb approached Grace, who was sitting by the fireplace. Her hands folded in her lap. Her hair, once soft and golden, now hung loosely around her face, untamed and wild, as if she had not cared for it in days. Her eyes, black as night, glinted in the dim light. She was staring at the flames, her lips moving in a language that made Caleb's skin crawl. "Grace," Caleb said, his voice trembling, "what is happening? Please, tell me what's going on." She turned to him slowly, her face unreadable. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with a smile that was both eerie and cold, she spoke. "You've been blind, Caleb," she whispered. "You've been searching for love, for a perfect partner, but you never saw the truth. I am the answer to your prayers. Yes, but not in the way you thought." Caleb's heart raced. "What are you saying?" he asked, stepping closer. "What have you become?" Grace's eyes narrowed, and she stood up with a sudden, unnatural grace. "I am the one you called to. You've prayed for someone to stand beside you. But I am more than that. I am the force you needed to awaken. The power that lies beneath the surface, buried deep within your own soul." Her words were like daggers, each one piercing deeper into Caleb's heart. He didn't want to believe her, but the fear that had settled in his chest told him otherwise. He could see it now, he could feel it, the dark power that had taken hold of her. It was like an unholy force, something that had slowly seeped into her very being until it had consumed her completely. Suddenly, the air grew thick with tension. The temperature dropped, and Caleb felt a chill crawl up his spine. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch, reaching toward him with a malevolent hunger. It was as though the very walls were closing in on him. And Grace, this thing that had once been the love of his life, was now the embodiment of darkness itself. "You've been living in a dream, Caleb," Grace continued, her voice now a low, Melodic hum. A dream that I've let you live in, so that you would call to me. I've been waiting for this moment. Waiting for you to awaken the darkness within you. Just as I've awakened mine. Caleb took a step back. His mind racing. What do you want from me? Why are you doing this? Grace's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. I want you to understand. Caleb, I've come to fulfill my purpose. And so have you. You've brought me into your life. And now, we will share this darkness together. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the weight of her words pressing down on him, suffocating him. He had invited this woman into his life, into his home, into his ministry, and now, he was paying the price. She had been his answer to prayer, but now, she was the very source of his torment. Please, Caleb whispered, his voice breaking, you don't have to do this. I don't want this. Grace stepped forward, her face inches from his. It's too late for that. Caleb, you've already chosen. You can't escape what has already begun. You are mine now, and together, we will bring the darkness to the light. With that, the room seemed to explode with an energy Caleb couldn't understand. The walls trembled, the lights flickered, and the shadows twisted in the corners of the room. Caleb fell to his knees, unable to breathe. The weight of Grace's words and the dark presence she had brought with her crashing down on him like a tidal wave. The next moments were a blur. Caleb's world spun, and he felt his grip on reality slip away. In the distance, he heard a voice, but it wasn't Grace's. It was something else, something far older, far more sinister. The voice spoke to him, calling him, pulling him deeper into the abyss. Caleb, you have summoned me. The voice whispered, now, you will see the truth. The truth about what you have invited into your life. Caleb struggled to rise, but his body felt heavy, as though he were sinking into quicksand. His heart raced, his breath shallow and labored. And then, as the darkness threatened to swallow him whole, he heard one final, chilling phrase. You've made your choice, and now, you will live with it. In that moment, Caleb realized the full extent of his mistake. He had been so desperate for love, for connection, that he had ignored the signs, ignored the warnings. He had allowed his own desires to blind him to the darkness that had lurked beneath the surface of Grace's beauty, beneath her gentle demeanor. And now, it was too late. The darkness had taken hold of Grace, and now it was coming for him. The battle had begun, but Caleb didn't know if he was strong enough to fight it, or if it was even possible to survive the war that had been waged within his own soul. As the darkness swirled around him, Caleb fell to his knees, exhausted and broken. Grace, or whatever she had become, stood over him, her eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. For a moment, everything was silent, the weight of his choices pressing down on him like a crushing force. But then, something stirred within Caleb, a spark of defiance, a sliver of the faith he had once held so dearly. With trembling hands, he reached out to the Bible that lay beside him, his fingers brushing the worn pages. In that instant, a surge of light erupted from the book, pushing back the shadows that had claimed his home. Grace screamed, the dark power within her recoiling from the light. Caleb's heart raced, but he didn't falter. He knew that he had to make a choice. Surrender to the darkness or fight with every ounce of strength he had left. God, help me, he whispered, the words barely escaping his lips. The light intensified, engulfing Grace in a blinding glow. Her form began to distort, writhing in agony, until finally, with one final, blood-curdling scream, she vanished into nothingness. Caleb collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The darkness had receded, but the battle had left its mark on him. He had won, but at what cost? He had lost the woman he had loved, the woman he had thought was sent by God. And now, he was left alone, with only the memory of the woman who had once been his answer to prayer. As the morning light filtered through the windows, Caleb stood up, weary but resolute. He knew that his journey was far from over. The scars of the past would remain, but he had survived, and with God's guidance, he would rebuild, not only his life but also the faith that had been tested to its limits. The storm had passed, but the lessons it had taught him would stay with him forever. The road ahead would be difficult, but Caleb knew one thing for certain: no matter what darkness lay ahead, he would never again lose sight of the light.